America. It's the land of opportunity, home of the free, and the wealthiest nation on the entire planet, or so we're told. But when you look at the reality on the ground, at the hardships faced by millions of Americans every single day, it paints a very different picture. Because beneath that shiny veneer of prosperity, there's a whole lot of financial suffering going on. We're talking about a system where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is wider than a canyon, where more money is being funneled to the top than ever before. It's like we've been witnessing the greatest magic trick in history, a grand wealth transfer happening right under our noses. Think about it. While billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg rake in more money in a day than most of us will see in a lifetime, there are families out there, parents working their butts off, who are still struggling to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is America truly a rich nation, or just a nation for the rich? Today, we're diving headfirst into the uncomfortable truth about poverty in America. We've got 25 staggering statistics that lay bare just how out of control this problem has become. But before we get to this list of depressing yet eye-opening facts, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And with that, let's get right into it. Our first fact is a real gut punch, folks. 13.4% of Americans, that's over 42.5 million people, are living below the poverty line. We're talking about millions of individuals and families struggling to afford basic necessities. And these aren't just abstract statistics. These are real people, our neighbors, our fellow citizens who are being left behind. Between December 2024 and January 2025, the child poverty rate in this country shot up from 12.1% to a staggering 17%. That's a 4.9% increase, which translates to roughly 3.7 million more children falling into poverty. What happened? Well, that's when those child tax credit payments, the ones that were actually helping families keep their heads above water, they expired. And speaking of struggling families, how about this? 1 in every 5 children in America relies on SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps, just to eat. Back in 2007, it was 1 in 8. It's a national shame that so many families have to rely on government assistance just to put food on the table. The Hunger Games American Edition. By the end of 2021, a whopping 41.5 million people were depending on federal aid just to get food. And guess what? In January 2022, when those child tax credits disappeared, another 6 million Americans were suddenly eligible for food stamps. The ultra-poor. Now brace yourselves for this 336,000 households with children in this country are living on less than $2 a day. These families, according to a University of Chicago study, are living in what's known as ultra-poverty. Food bank lines, a national disgrace. It's no wonder that 60 million Americans are forced to rely on food banks each year. According to Feeding America, the lines at some of these food banks start forming as early as 6:30 in the morning. Housing, because it's another area where millions of Americans are getting squeezed. More than 1 in 3 children in this country live in households that are burdened by housing costs. And then there are the 2.6 million families with children who are experiencing what's known as worst-case housing needs. They're extremely rent-burdened, meaning they're spending at least half of their income on housing, they're living at or below the poverty line, and they're not getting any help from the government. It's a national disgrace that 20% of the homeless population in America are children. Last year alone, it's estimated that 2 million American children slept in a homeless shelter or some other form of emergency housing. The unhoused, a growing crisis. There are at least 600,000 Americans who are chronically homeless, meaning they've been homeless for a year or more, or they've experienced at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. And with housing and rent prices continuing to skyrocket, this crisis is only going to get worse. Invisible on the streets. Even that 600,000 figure is likely a vast undercount. Experts estimate that the actual number of people living on the streets of America could be anywhere between 8 and 10 million. California, a microcosm of crisis. Since 2010, the number of unhoused people in the Golden State has increased by a staggering 31%. That's right, 31%. And it's not just people sleeping on the streets, folks. The number of people living in their cars, in tents, and in makeshift encampments has also exploded. Why is this happening in California? Well, for starters, the cost of living there is insane. According to a recent study by UCLA, 1.5 million renters in California are now spending half of their income on rent. Now, you might be wondering how poverty is even defined in this country. For a single individual, the poverty threshold in 2023 is $14,580. For a family of 4 with 2 children, it's $30,000. But here's the thing about poverty. It's not just about how much money you make, it's also about where you live. And in America, 12% of all children are growing up in what's known as concentrated poverty. These are neighborhoods that are characterized by high rates of poverty, unemployment, and crime. The working poor, a growing reality. According to a December 2024 study by the Pew Research Center, 41.4% of Americans are now classified as either low-income individuals or part of low-income families. Even those who are earning twice the official poverty rate are still struggling to make ends meet in this economy. The 1% versus the 99%, a tale of two Americas. Did you know that the top 1% of earners in America now make 20 times more than the bottom 90% every year? The Great Wealth Transfer. Over the past 45 years, the top 1% have siphoned off a staggering $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. That's right, $50 trillion. That's money that could have been used to invest in education, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it, but instead, it's been funneled to the very top. The 5% club, an exclusive group. According to the Economic Policy Institute, you'd need to be raking in at least $823,760 per year to join the top 1%. Billionaires and the bottom line. Did you know that the 747 billionaires in America now own 2/3 more wealth than the bottom 50% of U.S. households combined? The stock market, a playground for the rich. The wealthiest 10% of Americans own a whopping 89.7% of all shares. So, while the stock market might be touted as the great equalizer, the reality is that it's just another way for the rich to get richer. Meanwhile, for the rest of us, wages have remained stagnant for decades. Between 2000 and 2024, the average salary for workers in America increased by a paltry 13.7%. While the bottom 90% of Americans have seen their incomes increase by a measly 26% since 1979, the top 1% have seen their incomes soar by a whopping 160% during that same period. Elon Musk, poverty czar? The richest man in the world, Musk earns a mind-boggling 2.43 million times more than the average middle-class worker in a year. Jeff Bezos isn't far behind, raking in 1.73 million times more than the average American worker. America's global standing not so great. According to the OECD, which tracks poverty rates in developed nations, the United States ranks second. We're one of the worst offenders when it comes to the number of people living below the poverty line. The true cost of inequality. So, there you have it, folks. 25 shocking facts about poverty in America. It's a sobering picture, isn't it? We live in a country where millions of people are struggling to make ends meet, where children are going hungry, where families are being priced out of their homes, and where the gap between the rich and the poor is wider than ever before. We like to think of ourselves as a beacon of hope, a shining city on a hill. But the reality is that for millions of Americans, the American dream is just that, a dream. It's time to wake up, folks, and face the facts. We can't continue to ignore this crisis any longer. We need to have a serious conversation about poverty and inequality in this country, and we need to start taking action to address these issues. Because the truth is, we can do better. The future of our country depends on it.